Hi, so today I thought that we would talk about different kinds of glass. There are a ton of different kinds of glass involved in glass art, and not all of them are compatible. And I thought we'd talk about the different kinds just because I use so many different kinds in the plethora of different kinds of glass art that I do. So what is glass at its very base? First and foremost, it's about 70% silica, and then from there, the rest of it is typically made up of soda and lime, and then there's typically a percentage of impurities, but those can also be quantified as like pigments and other things that we add to it to make it, say, more stable, things that we add to it to change properties. So there's a lot of different things that we might mix into glass, but that's what we're starting with. So first we're over at my lamp workstation, my torch, because there's already a couple kinds of glass involved in that. So the first one we have is the one that I primarily use, which is borosilicate glass. What is borosilicate glass? Essentially what it is, it's going to be pretty hard compared to the other kind of glass that people use for lamp work, which is soda glass, also called soda lime glass, also called soft glass. What does that even mean? So I know these are different thicknesses and different colors essentially, but so soda lime glass, it's very soft, and what that means is when you melt it in the heat, you need a lot lower temperature and it's a lot more malleable. It's really favored by people that make like beads and jewelry, because it's really easy to manipulate it and get it to do what you want it to do. The other kind being borosilicate. It's a lot harder and needs a lot higher temperature to melt. It moves a lot slower, which also gives you more control. And what that means is people like to use this for more functional pieces because it's a lot harder and it's going to stand the test of time. Many artists that do borosilicate can boast that you can drop their projects and they won't break. My stuff is a little small and a little delicate for that, but these are also favored by people that make pipes and bowls and cups. So again, more functional things. I personally like it just because I feel like it holds up better. I have a lot more work time. It was definitely a learning curve when I tried out soft glass for the first time because I actually started with borosilicate in university. A lot of people go the opposite way. But that's just what I use at my bench. And then moving on to fusible glass. So what is fusible glass? Fusible glass at its base is going to be glass that has been tested to be in a kiln. What does that even mean? So manufacturers that produce it put it through testing with other glass that they can provide kind of a guarantee along with their product that it's gonna play nice with other things that go in the kiln. Again, what does that even mean? So there's this system called System 96. There's also System 90 and System 82. What do those numbers mean? Those are the coefficients of glass, or rather the COE, coefficient of expansion. Some people just call it coefficient of expansion. And it's essentially how the molecules play together when they are in a melted state. So System 96 is the most popular, most frequently used one. Typically you can also have a decent result going 6 above and 6 below. So theoretically, System 90 glass should work fine with System 96, but you definitely want to test it. But System 96 doesn't want to work well with System 86 or System 82. So it's just being aware of what those things are before you put them in your kiln and doing a lot of testing before you put time, energy, money into making maybe a big piece that might not work out. Now, what can happen when you mix glass that isn't compatible? There's a plethora of things that can happen, the primary one being that they will crack. They might fuse just a little bit. Some won't even fuse at all, but they'll probably fuse just a little bit and then crack. And they might not crack where you tried to fuse them together, they might crack in a weird way. And part of that is due to the expansion of it when it's in that molten state, and the contraction of it as it is cooling down. Also the contraction of it when glass wants to be a 1/4 inch thick. If you're putting like 2 1/8 inch pieces together, they're gonna try to mix together because they want to be together, but when the molecules aren't working together, it's gonna crack in a weird way. So what does that kind of look like? Let's go over to where I keep that glass. So there's a lot of different brands that make System 96 glass, but they all have this sticker. This is just a sheet of white that says System 96 on it. This is like a cutoff I got, but I know when I put this with another piece of 96 it's gonna work. I also should try to put it with things of a similar brand because those things have been tested at the manufacturer together. There's lots of different brands, lots of different ways that you can combine the glass. It doesn't all have to be clear. We have this really fun wispy red that I love. Here's one that I'm very surprised is safe to put in the kiln. It has almost like a glitter effect to it, because that's another thing, is in stained glass you have the application of more texture and more coatings, which you oftentimes can't put in the kiln because those chemicals react when they're heated up, obviously. So jumping straight into stained glass, you can definitely use fusible glass for stained glass. It's just typically more expensive because it's been tested. But you know, if it's the right color, the right texture, use what you've got. Glass people are massive hoarders, and if something is big enough to use, they're gonna keep it on the off chance they'll use it one day. So what do I mean by textures and stuff? So these are a couple clear examples, but see, this has a really fun texture. It kind of reminds me of like music notes or something. This would just melt into nothing in the kiln. And so I would use this on a stained glass piece. And while it's clear, it has a lot of cool texture that you're gonna notice if you're maybe not putting this like up high in a window, but maybe you're putting this lower or somewhere more visible. It also has this really fun kind of like mottled, like hammered texture in between. Very cool piece. Another cool stained glass that I have is this, which, let's see if I can get it to come up. Do you see that rainbow sheen? Oh wait, wrong side. So this is kind of like a rainbow iridescence. It's really called like iridescence coating. And what that means is they apply like a chemical coating to the outside of this that would not play nice in a kiln, but it looks really pretty on stained glass. And it's only applied to one side, so see how it's really intense there and can't really see it. You can only see it a little bit through the glass, but that's a super cool piece. Very excited to use it. These are also extremely expensive because of that coating, because of the chemicals that go into that. Another thing about stained glass is you can often combine colors. So this is a piece that I've been recently using, that's why it's such a small cutoff, but you can see how it's kind of mottled throughout. And if you look at the side, you can see there's multiple layers from where they probably poured the blue and then poured the green on top while it was molten in the factory and then rolled it. Super cool. Now, what do I mean by rolling? So at the factory, they pour out the glass and they roll it with these big old rollers. And then the edges have this funky kind of like squiggly texture edge to them. And a lot of people hate that because it's really hard to cut. some people seek them out because it's perfect for making like mountains and stuff. And it really just depends on what you're trying to achieve. Now, kind of a little bit deviating away from stained glass, I also use a lot of kind of regular glass in my work because I have a lot of it at my disposal being in a glass shop. What do I mean by that? I have a lot of cabinet glass and a lot of mirrors and such that they're not tested to be put into a kiln, and they're often called plate glass. What is that? It's glass that's intended to be put into cabinets and stuff. It's not tempered in any way, so it's not safety glass, but it's usually about an 1/8 inch thick, but you can get it all the way from a 1/16 all the way up to like 3/8, and it comes in mostly clear, but you can get it in some different fun textures and stuff, and it typically has a important component that is called the tin side. What is that? Well, the tin side is when let me say another name. This is also called float glass, and it's because they pour it out on top of water, and the water has a layer of tin on top of it. And as it's cooling down, that tin becomes a little bit a part of the glass. And that can be important when you're putting it in a kiln. Now, it doesn't really matter much when you're putting it in a cabinet because you can't see the tin at all. It's still perfectly clear. But when you're putting it into a kiln, there's a few different reactions that it can have. Like I said, chemicals in the kiln can be really cool or really bad. If you put the tin facing down inside your kiln, the glass is probably going to be cloudy because when it's molten, it's going to go up into your glass and then it's going to get cloudy. If you do the tin side facing up, it might be okay. But you can also have something called tin bloom. What is that? So all of the tin will kind of gather together in the kiln, and it'll start to leave the surface of the glass and bloom upward and make these really weird amalgamations of like this metal coming off your glass. Might be something you're looking for, it might not. But why would I risk using that if the tin is such a problem? It's way, 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 way cheaper than our glass is. So when I'm testing things in my kiln, I oftentimes will combine a piece of 1/8 inch art glass in a color that I want, but I really need it to be a 1/4 inch thick, right? So I'll add a piece of 1/8 inch plate glass on the bottom, fuse them together, and then try to get what I'm looking for. Let's look at an example of that though. So here's one thing that I've fused. This is a soap dish. It's green. On top we have some green art glass, and on the bottom you can't tell, but it was clear. And I used that by combining a piece of clear plate glass and a piece of green art glass. And I fused them together, and then I slumped them into a mold. That way I can not waste material, but still achieve what I'm going for at cutting costs, because glass is extremely expensive, especially when you're getting into colors. Now, let's talk more about colors across the realm. What do I mean? I mean, going back to the torch stuff to start this yellow. Warm colors are known to be very finicky in the flame, and it's just based on what chemicals are added to it. They're also typically more expensive, whereas cool colors are typically going to be a lot nicer, be a lot better behaved, more predictable, because a big problem with these colors, especially yellow, is you have a lot of tendency to scorch them, where as you're trying to warm up the glass in the flame, the chemicals that make it that color will scorch, will burn up, and you'll have these gross burns and black spots in your piece that you really can't do anything about. You're gonna have to scrape that off, start over, or some people just try to like mix it in, like melt it thoroughly and kind of use that in the center of their piece where you can't see it. And that's great if it's like opaque, like you can't see through the piece, but if you've scorched it and it's like a translucent color, it's probably not going to play as nicely. So those are all things that you need to like take into consideration, especially because some materials aren't going to play very nice together, and it's a lot of trial and error, and you're dealing with pretty expensive material, so obviously you want to try and do your very best, but there's a lot of testing that goes into it. Whether that's changing the temperature in your kiln, whether that's changing the material that you're using, whether that's changing even the brand, can make a significant difference. Now, so let's talk about some things that I like to add to my stuff in the kiln specifically. For example, one of those is going to be like pigments or like powders. This particular one's from Glassy Cuts. It's just like an aqua color. And what you would do is put this in a very small sifter and then apply it to the surface of the glass. Whether you want to do like a gradient or super intense just to get like a really intense color. You can use like a paintbrush to try to like shape it, but sometimes that shape can get a little fuzzy. Again, experimenting, doing testing before you apply it to your piece. But ultimately, you can achieve some really cool things with that. Another thing, I don't have any on me, so I'm just going to show this again. Lots of people use rod. They'll cut it into strips and give texture to things. You can cut it into little tiny pieces and make dots. One thing, like the soap dish that we were looking at, people will do like little lines on it to give texture so that, you know, the soap doesn't get stuck in the dish or what have you. Another thing, I'm gonna go back here, is going to be one of the most common things that people use in fusing, and that is called frit. Now, this just looks like crushed up glass, and it essentially is. Frit comes in about 5 different sizes, all the way from like powder, kind of like what we were just looking at. We've got like table salt, we've got little pebbles, which is kind of what this one is. We got big chunks, and then we've got like shards essentially. And you can do a lot of different things with that. Most of it is going to be creating texture. But a lot of people make like actual pictures just using a combination of these. So that's one big tool used by fusing artists. Another thing that I am partial to is it's kind of a combination of the powder. This is called Glassline, and it's essentially paint. It's made using glass like powder as its base, mixed with kind of like a gel, and you just paint it on to the surface. And a lot of people use it to outline, a lot of people use it to highlight and add dimension, but it's really whatever you want it to be. The last thing that I have here is smaller rods. So I was talking about like bigger rods over there. These are teeny tiny rods. They're called stringers. And again, people use it to create really fine lines on their pieces. They come in a plethora of colors. One of my personal favorite pieces I've made was where I used a literal candle to curve them and make spider webs and then fuse it all together. Again, super cool, super awesome. It's all about trial and error though. And you know, you can try as many things as you want to, but you never know if it's gonna work out. Like for example, talking about that spider web again. This was a piece that I did a tester where I used a paintbrush and the powder to try to make spider webs, and I just didn't like how fuzzy it looked. So then I tried using stringers, and this was kind of like the preliminary one. I loved how this turned out. I knew that I needed to account for the spacing when it would shrink in the kiln, but I was much happier with that result. And that's why making textiles is just really important to the process overall. So that's pretty much everything I've got. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Love to do some more talking about the differences and maybe the science behind it. But yeah, that's everything here. Thanks.